I am going to be giving you my talk today on reintroducing the Chequered Skipper to Rockingham Forest. I'm going to start by just running over very briefly the Back from the Brink project, because this is just one of a number of projects going on under the Back from the Brink, and some of you may not even know what that is. So I'm just giving a brief introduction to that first before doing more detail about the Chequered Skipper reintroduction. Oh, sorry. That's all. So yeah, what is Back from the Brink? I sort of think it's a bit of a timely thing at the moment, because I'm thinking, oh, Back from the Brink can mean all sorts of things in our current state that we're in. But in terms of the project, it's a national project going on across England for 4 years, and we're now in our 3rd year, due to end originally in February 2021, although we are possibly looking at ways we might be able to extend a bit longer due to the impact the COVID-19 has had on all of the projects. A lot of money for a conservation project, over £7.5 million altogether, of which £4.5 million came from National Lottery Heritage Fund, and a myriad of other funders helped support this as well, including People's Postcode Lottery, and for my project, the Patsy Wood Trust have been an important match funder. So what is Back from the Brink? So this was devised by 7 conservation partners who are looking to try and do things in a bit of a different way and see what additional work we could get done if we work together. And it was a meeting of all of these different species conservation organisations. So I work for Butterfly Conservation, but we're also part of the Rethink Nature group, which is Bumblebee Conservation Trust, Bug Life, Plant Life, Bat Conservation Trust, ARC and RSPB, and it's all overseen by Natural England. So as you can see, a lot of us are very small species charities. At the moment, Butterfly Conservation, we have about 80 employees. So in terms of what we can achieve on our own is maybe not that much in comparison to what we could do if we work together. So that's really where the idea of Back from the Brink was born. Well, sorry, that's not quite true. It's where Rethink Nature was born. And Back from the Brink is particularly focusing on sort of our highest priority threatened species. So species that are on section 41, so it means that they're species that are considered under threat and the most risk of disappearing. And we're looking to try and conserve these species where they exist in the landscape already, or in my case, where they used to exist in the landscape. Also, by working together and working with these other organisations, we can provide more integrated advice. So when we're giving advice on work for butterflies, we can also look at where we can incorporate other species into that advice as well. So that's sort of one of the main underpinnings of this project. And obviously, working across the country, we've got lots of opportunities to inspire other people to get involved in the project and to value what's around them and to help take action and preserve them for the future. So there are 19 projects going on across England. Let me just find my point. Oh, sorry, that was just find my pointer. There we go. So there are 7 integrated projects, of which are working on multiple species. So like my project, we're not only working on Chequered Skipper, we're working on 14 other species, including some bats, birds, plants and reptiles. And this is Rockingham Forest in this region here. So covers mostly in Northamptonshire, but does stretch just across the border into Cambridgeshire as well. There are also 12 single species projects focusing on things such as ladybird spider, pine martin, lesser butterfly orchid, and you can see the spread of projects goes from right up in Northumberland, which is Pine Martin Project, and then right down to tip of Cornwall, where we had a very exciting project looking at Cornish path moss, which only exists in this country and is only in about ½ metre square left of it. But it has been a bit beset by problems, that particular project, because it grows on old mines quarried that have arsenic present, so obviously created quite a health and safety issue there. And each of the projects is being led by a different species partner, so depending on what species the project is focusing on, obviously it depends which partner is taking the lead on that. So obviously Roots of Rockingham is the overall name of the project in Rockingham Forest, and it's led by Butterfly Conservation. But we're also, because we're working on adder and we're working with arc, we've got barbastelle and brown long-eared bat, so working with Bat Conservation Trust on those. RSPB, we've got marsh tit, spotted flycatcher, willow tit, lesser spotted woodpecker and lesser redpoll. And then on plant life, we're working on fly orchid and basil thyme. But none of obviously Butterfly Conservation don't own any of their own sites in this area, so it's important that we're working with our local landowners and conservation groups. So we're working with Boughton Estate, Forestry England, Bedcamps Northants Wildlife Trust, and our local branches of Butterfly Conservation, as well as on a couple of national nature reserves. So this is a picture of my overall project area. So it extends, you can see it covers quite a large area, and there's 33 different blocks of woodland, although we are focusing our efforts on 11 major blocks within that. As you can imagine, that would be quite a lot to get through otherwise. For those of you that aren't familiar with this area, this is Peterborough over here, and then over here is Corby, and then down here is Kettering. We've separate, and just to point out, this is fine shade here. That's where I am based usually based in the Forestry England office there, although obviously I am currently based at home. So we've separated these blocks of woodland into sort of 5 different networks, and that's according to their proximity to each other. So these blocks are within 2.5 kilometres distance to each other, which is what we anticipate the range of the checkered skipper to fly and colonise by itself. So we have these 5 separate blocks, and these are our 11 priority sites that we're focusing on, and you can see the majority of them are these larger blocks of woodland where there is significant habitat already or potential for there to be good checkered skipper habitat. So yes, I'm going to move on to the info on our checkered skipper reintroduction, which is obviously a key part of the project and always the headline grabbing element of a project as well. So it is a species that is still present in the UK, but it is only present in Scotland and has been confined to this area up near Fort William. But it used to be quite a common sight in Rockingham Forest area, so that's down here, and did also stretch out up into Lincolnshire as well as across a few records heading out into the Midlands that way too. And it did used to be, as I said, it used to be quite common, and then they started noticing, only really started looking into it in the early 70s when ecologists suddenly realised that it was being less and less recorded. So they had a big survey trying to cover all the previous historic records, see whether the butterfly was still present there. And this was carried out in 1973. And there were still a few records then, but it obviously had been declining quite significantly. And these dates on here are the sort of last records that we have of the chequered skipper within this Rockingham Forest area. So you can see that it did used to be present in all of this woodland block that we're currently working in, but gradually does seem to have disappeared from the southern part of the forest earlier than the northern part, where it was holding on into the early 70s. And the last actual record we have of chequered skipper was just actually over the border in Rutland, and on Luffenham Heath golf course, and that was in 1975. So it was then declared extinct in England in 1976. The main reason that we think there was a big decline in the chequered skipper and the reason it got lost from the area was largely due to a lack of management of woodlands. Following the end of the war, there was a lot of change in how woodlands were managed. There was a lot of plantations put in, so conifer plantations, plus generally a lack of coppicing. So woodlands started to decline in their suitability for chequered skipper. This is a picture of a sort of very shaded ride, which is quite a common sight in many of our woodlands, but it's not the habitat that chequered skippers like. They like to have sunshine and open areas within the woodland. And as these rides closed over, it's likely that the chequered skipper populations became increasingly isolated from each other, and therefore there is no opportunity for them to interact and breed, and so gradually they just disappeared. So just a word on our Scottish population. So the larvae in Scotland feed only on purple moorgrass, which is actually a different larval food plant to the English population. So English population is thought to have been primarily on false-brome grass and wood smallweed, the Calamagrostis species. They're similar in the type of habitat that they like, though. They like the open, damp grasslands, often on edges of broadleaf woodlands or in the centre where you have these nice open areas. In Scotland particularly, they're associated with the whaleys, where you can see running through where the power lines go through the woods. And probably not so much in England. They're more associated, would have been associated with the glades and the rides that were kept open for management purposes. Now, this isn't the first time that the chequered skipper has tried to be reintroduced into England. In the 1990s, there was a PhD student working on the chequered skipper, and they did a trial reintroduction in the Bardney Lime Woods, which is just north of us in Lincolnshire. It was quite a small scale reintroduction. They were really just looking at one woodland site to put it into, and just really one or two rides within that site that were suitable for it. And from what I understand, there was no real emphasis or commitment to the ongoing management of the site. And thankfully, we still have a lot of contact with John, who did this PhD, and he gave us great insight into what had gone well and what hadn't gone well with his reintroduction attempts. There was quite a lot of difficulties in bringing back the butterflies. In that reintroduction attempt, they were sourcing them from areas in France, and there was quite a time lag between bringing the adult butterflies back to England, so they were often a little bit worse for wear when they got here, and had seemed to have laid quite a lot of eggs within the pots. So they may not have been in the best condition when they were put out into the reintroduction site. And they also had problems following the reintroduction with bad weather, which obviously can have quite a negative impact on what the butterflies are able to do once they're back in England. So obviously sad for them that it didn't work at that time, but it's all really good knowledge that has helped to try and make this reintroduction more successful. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Long before I even got involved in the project, there was a lot of preparation going on for the reintroduction. Some of this was being carried out by our colleagues in Belgium, who did some species distribution modelling. So they were looking at climate and land cover data to see which areas of Belgium were likely to be most suitable to bring the Chequered Skipper back from. This map's really interesting, I think, because so Rockingham is somewhere here, so you can see pretty much orange area. And then if you look at Scotland, obviously up here, where it's very green and red, this is where the Scottish population live. So that was, apart from the fact that we didn't really want to have any negative impact on the Scottish population, the fact that the quite different climatic conditions in Scotland and the difference in food plant meant that we thought it would be better to source our butterflies for the reintroduction from Belgium rather than this Scottish population. And so you can see it's much more of the similar orangey and greeny colours here. Well, some areas are green, but mostly orange for the reintroduction site. Sorry, source sites, I should say. Obviously, we don't want to decimate the poor Belgian population of Chequered Skipper either. So they have been doing a lot of work over in Belgium, looking for the best sites for us to take butterflies from, making sure they have good numbers of butterflies there so that we don't have a negative impact on them. Obviously, bringing in a species from another country, we need to make sure we're not bringing in anything that we don't want to. So trying to make sure that we're not bringing in any pests or pathogens, diseases or anything with the butterflies. Quite a low risk in compared to some other species. You know, there are some butterflies that would migrate here naturally, although I think the skipper is a bit of a small one to be able to do that by itself. But we had been working with Zoological Society of London with their disease risk assessment team and making sure that we carried out everything correctly and had a vet with us on site that came with us to Belgium and then assessed the butterflies when we were there and has been monitoring them now that we're back in the UK as well. There was some talk that we were going to have to possibly wear these lovely suits when we were doing our collecting to make sure that we weren't picking up anything on our clothes and footwear, which would have been quite hot work because it was pretty hot in Belgium when we were collecting the butterflies. But luckily we were able to reduce this necessity by just wearing different sets of clothes in Belgium and in the UK, and having lots of boot scrubbing with the right chemicals so that we didn't bring anything back that way. I also spent quite a lot of my first summer doing some vegetation surveys here. This item here is a drop disc, so measuring vegetation height and also looking at what species were present so that we could choose the right areas which had the best, the greatest abundance of the right food plants that we were looking for. And we also have a steering group that helps make our decisions for us. So it involves all the landowner partners that are involved, as well as Natural England and the Zoological Society of London. We also got some people that have been key in setting up this project and that have been working on looking at which sites would be good over the past few years. And as I said earlier, people that have worked on the previous reintroduction have been invaluable in helping shape what we're doing now. And what was really helpful to me, because when I started, I had never been to Belgium and seen the sites in Belgium. I hadn't even seen Chequered Skipper in Scotland. So I didn't really know if the sort of habitats that we had were going to be suitable. So one of our colleagues from Belgium came over for the steering group, and he was really positive about the habitat that was available. So that was really encouraging for our first walk around. So then we had, so in the spring of 2018, it's always a last minute dash because we wait to hear from Belgium when chequered skippers are out, and when they seem to be at their peak, that's when we try and go over. They have a short flight period. They're only really around for 5 to 6 weeks. So it's quite a tight turnaround. And so we dashed over to Belgium and collected our butterflies. And this region here, the Fan for Men region, is the region that was chosen in the end for the collection. And this was both on the climate modelling and also on the abundance of chequered skipper. We wouldn't have been able to do this without massive support from the Belgian side of things. Philippe here is key in helping this reintroduction go ahead. He looks after a lot of the sites where we collected chequered skipper from. They've done a big, massive EU Life project a few years ago where they opened up a lot of glades and rides within their forest complex. They have much bigger forests than we have, so it's really exciting to see it on the ground. But his knowledge and where to go to look for chequered skippers was absolutely invaluable. And we had a great team of volunteers. They're all people that work in butterfly research or on PhDs, and they all gave up their time for the day to come and help us. These are butterflies that are quite sparsely distributed throughout the landscape. You don't get a nice cloud of them like you do with some other species. So without their help, there is no way that we'd have managed to collect the individuals that we did. So this is one of the sites in Belgium. This is one of the glades that would have been opened up by Philippe in his management work there. And this is just basically lots of hours of wandering through, looking for little signs of the chequered skipper to appear. And we did also have to contend with wild boar, who it was really interesting for me to see them because I hadn't really seen them in action before. And you can see what the type of habitat that we're often trying to recreate over here with the way they turn up the ground and create these bare earth patches within these glades. So it was really interesting to see the sort of damage that they do in some sense, but actually it's what we're often trying to do over here to recreate those bare ground habitats. But they are slightly nervous to be around, especially when they had little ones, which they had a whole group of little wild boar, so we didn't want to get between them and the parents. And this was my very first chequered skipper, my very first live chequered skipper I'd ever seen. So that was a super exciting moment for me. I would don't know, I shall show you at the end actually. I don't want to stop sharing my screen because just in case you might be able to see actually in the corner if you can see me. I don't know if you can see that. If not, I'll show you at the end when I come out. But that's the actual size of a chequered skipper. It's only about 3 centimetres across. So it's very small and very fast flying, so it can be quite a challenge to track down. And once we'd caught them, we would generally catch one and put it in a pot, and then we wanted to determine what sex it was. And this was because we were trying to mostly bring back females. Our aim at the beginning of the collecting period was to try and bring back 50 butterflies. We had wanted to bring back 40 females and 10 males. Bringing back the females was obviously we wanted them to be full of eggs and then to lay their eggs in their new habitat. And the males, we wanted to bring back a few males to, just in case any of the females hadn't mated. They tend to mate quite quickly after they emerge, so they generally would have already mated when we caught them. But just in case, we wanted to bring back a few males, and also to sort of promote some natural interactions between males and females in their new site. So just how do we tell apart a male and a female checkered skipper? The sort of two main ways really. There is the abdomen. So we're looking at, this is a male on the left here. The abdomen is longer and thinner than on the female. And it sticks out generally below the base of the wings and a little bit of a tufty end to it. Whereas the female, she has like a fatter abdomen, obviously being full of eggs, and her abdomen seems stops at the base of the wings there. The other way to tell them apart, which I'll show you on some pictures that come up later, is looking at the antennae. You can't see it from this angle because you can see they both look the same really from this angle. They look a bit black with orange tips at the clubs. But if you look at them head on, the male, it's the base of the club, the underside of the club is all orange, and the female is orange at the tip and black at the base. But I will show you that on some photos that we come across later. It might sound a bit ridiculous to be looking at antennae, but if the butterfly is still enough and you can get a good view with your close focusing binoculars, get a head-on view, it's actually a really good way to tell the difference. Because sometimes, especially as they get older, a bit scraggier, it can get a bit hard to see what's going on with the abdomen. The coloration is also a bit different, but that's much harder to tell in the field because you're not seeing them next to each other. But the male is generally a bit more orangey, and the female has slightly paler colouring, more sort of golden colour. After catching, I was just going to say that when they're in the pots, obviously it's much easier to get a good look at the antennae. So again, that's a good way to be able to tell them apart when they're in the pot. And once they're in the pot, we would obviously mark down where we collected them from, which location, and then they'd be put into cool bags. This is to stop them being so active, to make them more dormant. So they don't need any food or anything when they're in dormant, and it just makes them less fragile, so then they're not losing scales off their wings as they're fluttering around in the pots. And also it seems to stop the females from being tempted to lay any eggs in the pots as well. So they were put in cool boxes as soon as we caught them, and then overnight in the hotel they were kept in the fridge. But after they'd been caught, this is Jenny the vet who is with us from the Zoological Society of London, and she observed, she took notes on all of the butterflies, just checked what condition they were in, also weighed them to see whether there was any difference in weight when we got them back to England when we released them, and just checking to see there was no mites or damage to them before we took them back to England. So the first year, so in 2018, it was in May that we did our first release into the Reintroduction site. And it got a great amount of coverage, which was very exciting for a little small invertebrate. So there was, made it a bit of a crazy day with lots of film crew and early start. And yeah, we were on site from ridiculously early, 6 o'clock in the morning. It had been a weirdly, we'd brought them back the night before and put them in these nets. That was to give them time to acclimatise to their sort of new environment. So we had 2 of these nets and had half the butterflies in each of the nets. And it was actually, though, a really cold, windy night. And I was really worried that they wouldn't be there in the morning, or that the nets would have blown away, or all sorts. So I didn't say I got much sleep, but we were on site very early because we had been due to have, I think, some BBC breakfast film the release, but they actually weren't able to be on site. So we were just all there very early for no reason. But it was still a very exciting moment. We did have Spring Watch with us and Chris Packham, which was very exciting. But then butterflies being a bit cheeky, it was so cold that when we took the nets off, there was no flying off and big release. They just sat there because they were not warmed up at all. So this isn't really how you would see them naturally. You wouldn't find them roosting opposite each other on a grass stalk like this, but it did make opportunity for some great photographs. And actually here you can see that the orange, that would be a male, because you can see the underside of his antennae is all orange from that head-on angle. And we had to wait, it was probably not till about 11:30 that the sun sort of started coming out and the butterflies started opening their wings and started to move around. So they had quite a wait. We had a whole team of volunteers on site. Obviously, we wanted to see what the butterflies were doing, so we had a massive volunteering effort to see what the butterflies did once they'd been released, how far they went, whether we could see any females egg laying, which habitat they were laying in, so that we can make sure that we have the management of the site correct. So I had over 20, 30 volunteers involved in this surveying effort, which is huge. And then we went to look, we obviously didn't know how successful the release had been, so we went back to see whether we could find any larvae a little bit later in the summer. This is Pete Beals. For anyone that knows, he has done amazing photographic records of all the UK butterfly species, with all the pictures of the different instars of the larvae, which is invaluable when you're hunting for them. And he'd done a lot of work on the Chequered Skipper in Scotland, so he came along to give us some tips. But he did say, when he saw our habitat that we put them into, he's like, you are looking for like a needle in a haystack because there's so much grass everywhere. It's very difficult, and indeed it proved so. So what we were looking out for was the tubes that the skippers make. And they make these really cool little tubes, pull together the edges of a grass blade with silk, and then they live in the tube and feed above and below their little home. So they often, you're really looking out for sort of distinctive notches in the grass blades and these tubes. But unfortunately, it's not quite that simple, because they're not the only skipper species to make these tubes. Large skippers also, which there are a lot of in this area, also make these tubes. So you look for the tube first, and then you try and encourage the caterpillar out with a little piece of grass to encourage it out of its home, so you can have a better look at it. This was our surveying team, so just hunting down in the grass down here, looking for any tubes, and then seeing if we could find what larvae they were. And we did end up finding a lot of tubes and a lot of these larvae, but this is a large skipper larvae, and we could tell that just from its coloration. And what we were really looking for at this stage was, at this age that we were looking for the larvae in their fourth instar, would have had this distinctive black stripe on the basal segment there. Sorry, the anal segment there. So just an update from 2019. So sorry, in the first year we didn't find any larvae at the end of 2018. So we really didn't know what the situation was. So going into 2019, I don't know if you remember it, we'd had a really, this is the sort of grass, this is false brome grass. So this is what we were hoping it would look like, but I don't know if you remember, we had a massive, really hot summer in 2018, and so it was very dry, and we were worried that that might have had impact on the larvae survival, and because their grass just would have died off earlier. And in May we were on tenterhooks. We heard that they'd come out in Scotland, but we hadn't seen any sightings in England. We had volunteers out on site every day looking out for them, and then finally had some exciting news from one of my volunteers, Dave James, who'd he's the county recorder for Northampton, so it's great that he got the first sighting, and he got this first male on the reintroduction site. So that was extremely exciting news. And that's a female, so you can, in the nice photos there, you can easily see that the longer, thinner abdomen of the male, and then the fatter, dumpier abdomen of the female. And we had a great team of surveyors on site, over 400 hours of walking the rides they put in over the flight period, which was great. And for some of them, it's their first sighting of Chequered Skipper, particularly in England. And whilst they were busy on site, we had another mad dash to Belgium with a new collecting team of volunteers over there to collect some more, because we wanted to make sure that the population can survive. So we wanted to bolster it with some additional individuals from Belgium. And again, I really liked, this is Tony from Zoological Society of London, who did a great presentation on disease risk and health and safety using his alternative to PowerPoint. That's just some different rides. Again, great to see some. We went to different sites, and the second time we obviously didn't want to take from the same sites we had the previous year, so we went to different sites within the same whole complex of woodlands, and great to see the different habitats that have been created. And this one's actually a female, so you can see in the pot, even though she's in the pot there, you can see she's got a black base to the antennae with an orange tip. So that's really what we're looking at when we've got them in the pot. And we had a different vet with us this year, with Tammy, who was helping with the different disease analysis on the Chequered Skippers. And this time, so I forgot to say, in the first year we ended up bringing back, although we'd aimed to get 50, we only managed to catch 42, which just highlights how difficult they are to find in the landscape. That's with 11 of us out searching and catching over a period of about 1.5 days that we collected over. And we brought back 32 females the first year and 10 males. The second year, so last year, we actually didn't manage to catch as many. I think we were slightly early. It was slightly earlier in the season for them. They emerged slightly later last year. So when we went over, the females had only just emerged, which was fantastic. So it was super fresh, but we only managed to bring back 12 females and 12 males last year from Belgium. And this was our second reintroduction. And this time we wanted to mark the Belgian ones so we could tell the difference between them and the English ones. They're quite tricky. It's the first time I'd had a go at marking, so my colleague Caroline did most of that, but it was not very fancy. You're just marking them with a felt pen. Here's a red dot, just so that you can tell that that's a Belgian one and not an English one. And also trying to mark them on the underside, because you do sometimes find them roosting or sitting with their wings shut. So wanted to be able to distinguish them from the English. And this was an exciting moment just after the release of the second lot of Belgian ones. An English one came flying along. So for many of these guys, it was their first one seeing one of the newly emerged English Chequered Skippers. So that was very exciting. So then again, last year in September, we were out looking for larvae, looking for these lovely tubes, and amazingly, we did actually find our first Chequered Skipper larvae, which I was hugely excited about because there's such a lot of habitat, such a lot of grass that all looks the same. All the larvae we found were using the wood small reed, the Calamagrostis species, not the false brome, but it is the more prevalent grass on site. It's quite dominant in some of the rides there. So yeah, it was great to find these larvae though. And this one is actually a 5th instar, because you can see that it doesn't have the black stripe on the tail segment there. So yeah, we found both. Did I get? So yes, we found both, and a couple of days apart, they'd actually changed from 4th instar to 5th instar. So this one is the 4th instar, so still has the black stripe there and the black head, and then the 5th instar has turned all green. And then they spend the winter, they hibernate, well, they create a little hibernacula for themselves, putting together several small several pieces of grass, making a little tube to overwinter in. And they'll overwinter as a larvae, and then they'll emerge usually in April time, when they'll emerge. And they don't actually feed after they've emerged, they just bask and grow before they pupate. And they're, I don't have a picture actually of one of those. They usually turn brown then, so they're even harder to spot amongst the grass, because the grass at the time that they emerge then is still quite brown and dead, so they're very camouflaged then. So yeah, and this is again a nice photo of when they're in this 5th instar, they're usually more open. They're not in such a tube then, so they're a bit, you can see they're quite fat then. They nearly fill the whole width of the grass blade, and so they can't actually pull the tube around them anymore, so it's a much more open tube affair. So you can see these distinctive notches in the grass blade below the tube as well. So I shall quickly speed through the next bit. So obviously that's sort of seems like oh, it's done now, we've done the reintroduction, but obviously that's not it. There's a lot of habitat management work that we've done prior to the reintroduction, but also that we have to carry on doing, and making sure that that's written into management plans as much as possible, or getting the landowners into countryside stewardship schemes so that the ride maintenance can continue. So for the habitat management, we're looking at creating wide sort of open rides or scallops, but also making sure that it's can be rotationally managed. So a rotational mowing program in place, because obviously you don't want them to mow it all at the same time, because that would destroy any larvae and habitat that are present. But if you do it on a rotational basis, every 2 to 3 years, cutting different sections, different sides of the ride, then you can create a mosaic of habitats, and that's what we're really looking at doing. And obviously we've want to continue our programme of surveying and monitoring as we go along, so we can see how they're faring and how they're adapting to their new habitats. These are just a few pictures just to finish off of some of the habitat management work that we've done over the last 3 years, is opening up some rides. So it can look quite a big impact at first and causes a few drawn breaths, but it's actually this. So this is at Firmin, if anyone knows Firmin Woods. So this is a before. It's not too shady yet, but it really doesn't take too long before the ride completely closes over and you lose all this lovely grassland habitat. And then opening it up, we did did it through a biomass project. So it meant that a lot of the wood got taken for biomass. So it meant that it actually cost us a lot less to be able to do quite a significant amount of work. And then that was a just after picture, and this already you can see it is greening up again, which is fabulous. And one of our other sites again was quite a dark ride, but now lovely and sunny, and the butterflies have been loving it. And I don't know whether this will play. I can't get that to play. Sorry, I haven't worked out my technology. That was to show you some of the difficulties we had this winter. Was obviously it was super wet, and which means that these are clay woodlands, so it meant that we didn't want to use traditional tractored wheeled machines in there because they create big ruts, which isn't good for well, for the habitat or for follow-up management if there's big ruts everywhere on the ride edges. So we had to bring in a tracked vehicle, which creates much less impact on the rides. And this was a video of the tracked machine in action, but I'm afraid I can't get that to play. So I think that brings, sorry, is a bit of a rush towards the end. I just realised what the time was. I'm obviously going to happy to take any questions in a moment. But obviously there's also more information, or if you want to see what other projects are going on, there's our website, which is Natured BFTB. We are running, because it's our first anniversary of being our first English Chequered Skipper at the moment. So we're running a little competition for people to help us celebrate that by making a cake, very Chequered Skipper themed cake, or a card, and then with prize being a lovely framed photograph of the first Chequered Skipper that we had in England last year. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter at Natured BFTB. And this is my email address. If you had anything that you wanted to let me know about or to get involved, then please feel free to contact me on my email address. So I think that is, I did again have another little video that I can't show you, sorry about that. So I'll just leave me on my screen there. Do I need to stop sharing my screen now, Holly? Is that the best?
Yeah, if that's okay. Thank you so much for that, Susannah. That was great, so interesting. So everyone, if you've got any questions now, please either post them in the chat box and my colleague Sophie will read those out for you, or raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute yourself.
And could you see my Chequered Skipper when I was showing the size of it?
Oh, it was smaller before, but we can see that before. So tiny.
It's about 3 centimetres across, so you can imagine how difficult when they fly really fast. So the volunteers do an amazing effort at trying to find them.
Yeah, I can't believe how small they are. Brilliant. Right, does anyone have any questions?
We've got some in the chat.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Sophie.
So Elena Williams asked, what's the ideal ride width you would recommend?
Okay, so that it depends on the height of your trees. You'd be looking at least 1.5 to 2 times the width to the height of your trees. You see, does that make sense? So say your trees were 5 meters tall, then you'd want your ride to be at least 7.5 to 10 meters wide. So often a lot wider than you think is a good rule of thumb. And it also depends on which side of the ride you have taller trees. Some of the sites I work in are forestry sites, so they have really tall pine trees on one side. So that can have a big impact, obviously, the height of the trees on the side that creates the most shade. So I'd also say we tend to prioritise work on east-west running rides because they tend to get sunshine for more of the day than on north-south rides.
Great, thank you. I don't have any more hands up, Sophie, so if you crack on with the questions in the chat and then we'll...
Yeah, we've got plenty in the chat. So Margaret asks just if you can name the grass again, please.
Oh, so false brome, which is Brachypodium sylvaticum, one of the main ones, and Calamagrostis. It's I always probably say it wrong, Margaret. Epigejos, it's the wood small reed.
Well, thank you. Any more in the chat, Sophie?
Yeah, we've got quite a few coming in. Elliot Newton said, in terms of longer habitat management, could wild boar be considered as a conservation tool to help maintain a favourable open habitat?
Possibly. I think that's a bit, I think, yeah, I don't know. That would probably involve a lot of coordination of the different landowners in the area. And these woodlands, the largest woodland's about 570 hectares, which is reasonably large, but some of the others are quite small. So the wild boar, because they can take over. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe in the future. I think that's probably quite a long way off for the moment, though.
You got any hands up, Holly?
No, there's nothing at the moment. You go through the ones.
No, yeah, I've got loads. Yeah. Alex Lee said, I wonder, how did you get the local community involved in this project?
So we've been running a lot of training, and as I said, also there's lots of different species we're working on as well. So we've been running training workshops for anyone that wants to get involved in helping with our surveying and monitoring work. And there's also, we've been running habitat management work parties so people can get involved with that. Also running public engagement events, so family friendly events where you can tell people about the work that we're doing, and going out into schools to do work with local schools. And also running some art workshops we've been doing last year. We started with trying to engage with people in a slightly different way through doing some pottery workshops and creative writing.
Richard Goldfinch asked, are there any other butterfly species benefiting from this management work?
Yeah, so one good thing as well as being out and about on site so much is often this habitat is great for dingy and grizzled skippers as well, depending on whether their food plants are present, but we have had good numbers of them recorded as well, so they definitely benefit from that management. And quite a lot of our butterflies like those sort of sunny open habitats, so they'll benefit from that as well. And quite a lot of our other species, so a lot of the reptiles, it's good habitat for reptiles as well, creating this open habitat and feeding grounds for some of our bird species and bat species too.
I'm just looking through the chat now for who has the next question. Joe said, what's the difference in the habitat now compared to when they died out? And do you think they have a better chance to stay now than they did in the 70s? Yeah,
so they're definitely a lot more open. So there's been a lot more woodland management going on in the last 10 years. So a lot of the plantations are being gradually removed as well, which is allowing more broadleaves to, well, they're turning the woodlands back into more broadleaf woodlands, but also incorporating more open rise and glades into the habitat management now. So yeah, they definitely look different to how they would have 10, 15 years ago. The second part of the question, with the 70s, what was the second part of the question again? Sorry.
Do you think they have a better chance of surviving now than they did back in the 70s?
I'd say definitely the habitat's definitely more suitable. So in terms of that, then yes. Obviously, we can't know exactly why they disappeared. We're just sort of doing our best guesses, really. So if there were some other influencing factors that caused them to die out that we don't recognise yet, then obviously that could have an influence now that we're not aware of.
Cool. Charles said, are you considering further releases, either Belgians at the current location or even moving some English ones to new locations?
Yes, so we were due to do a third release this year, but obviously we have not been able to do that. So if we do manage to get in a project extension, we'd look at doing that next year. And there's also, we are hoping to continue some work in the area and the project to try and get some different funding so that we continue doing some work for the next few years, and we would like to put the butterfly into some of the different sites within the whole woodland network, so that it has as much chance to spread throughout it as possible. And also, whether we'd use any English ones, not yet. We'd want to make sure that we had a stable population of good numbers before we moved any around within, any around from the English ones.
Cool. Neil said, will the project rely purely on releases and the UK reproduction? If so, what does the modelling look like to realise the objective, and how long do you think it will take?
Yes, it does rely purely, sorry, I had to go through that. It does rely purely on the releases, and hopefully we're hoping that they will be a self-sustaining population. Will develop from that. I don't think we've done any modelling on how long that might take, but the general thinking behind butterfly reintroductions is it would be at least 5 years of having the butterflies appear every year to be reasonably confident that we had a self-sustaining population.
Cool. Stephen Davis said, you haven't mentioned whether they've been seen in 2020 yet. Is that simply down to lockdown restrictions, or is it just a bit too early in the normal flight period?
So we would be expecting to see them again anytime soon. We haven't been able to be out like we would have been normally, but we are just starting to get out and about again now. Obviously with the lifting of the movement of driving to sites has meant that we can start some work again. So fingers crossed that we'll have some good news soon.
Brilliant. Kat said, how far do the records go back for this butterfly?
I don't actually know that off the top of my head. I think we have records from the 1800s of this butterfly, from some of the sort of what's they call it? William Bree, I think there is. I think there might be 1850s or something like that. We do have a Chequered Skipper record from Rockingham area from the 1850s. That might be one of the earliest ones, but they wouldn't be consistent, consistent records, be quite sporadic.
Brilliant, thanks. Just looking in the chat, there's a lot of questions about using boars and how feasible would it be using domestic pigs to habitat the area. I'm not sure if you'd know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer. I do know that they did have some pigs on one of the sites that they were using there, but I don't think that's stopped now. So I think it is an issue. I think I saw vaguely something appear in the chat about fencing and everything, and I think that is the case in these woodlands, is that there would need to be considerable amount of fencing if you were even thinking about putting wild boar in. And there are a lot of, most of them are publicly accessible woodlands, so there's a lot of public and dog walking that goes on there, so that also might be quite tricky.
Cool to say that James Harding Morris knows the answer to the first record question. It was 1797 in Clapham Park Woods, Bedfordshire.
Thanks, James.
And a cat asked, she said that she remembers from university there was an importance of having a bend in the rides. The straight ones create wind funnels. Is that? But she hasn't heard anything about that since. Is that still something people consider true?
Yeah. So it can depend on the site, and we're sort of sometimes balancing what is maintainable because we're working with other landowners, so it's what they'll actually commit to. So the ideal would be, yes, either bends in ride. If you've got a natural bend in the ride, that's great. If you don't, the ideal would be to have pinch points. So you'd have areas where the vegetation would come back in so that it would meet in the middle maybe. So you would then have a natural break, so you would stop that wind tunnel effect. Or the alternative, especially in smaller woodlands, is to create scallops. So that's where you'd have the straight edge and then you'd have a semicircle, and then it would carry on straight and then another semicircle. And then if you do that on the opposite side of the ride too, then you create more open areas and clearings within that ride. So that's a way of creating some great habitat without having to widen the whole width of the ride.
Brilliant.
Sometimes you do have to go with what the landowner will commit to, and sometimes that might not be the ideal. It might be a bit straighter than you'd like.
Yeah, it's all about what's possible and what isn't. David said you showed a slide which showed 5 woodland blocks. Were they released into all 5 over the 2 years of the releases?
So the initial plan had been to release into 3 of the woodland blocks, because we only had 3 years of the project, and we can't take too many from Belgium at the same time, otherwise we could have a negative impact on their population. But after doing the first year of the release, we decided, because of the habitat available and wanting to make sure that at least one site had a sustainable population, we did reintroduce the first 2 reintroductions that we've done have been done to the same site. But there is potential for the 3rd reintroduction that we will do that into a different site next year if we can. And then if we have further projects, then we might look at seeing how we can get it into all the 5 networks.
India Wedge said, do the Chequered Skipper have any natural parasites in their original strongholds? And would it be considered to reintroduce those parasites into the new areas, just because the associated parasites would also potentially be rare?
That is something I do not know. There's nothing that I'm aware of. I don't know if anyone's studied Chequered Skipper in enough detail down to that level. There's been anecdotal, people have said anecdotally that wood ants and Chequered Skippers are more on sites where wood ants are present, but that's something I've just heard mentioned. I don't actually have any, there's no sort of research or evidence around that as yet.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? There haven't been any new ones in the chat for a minute. I don't know if there are any hands raised, Holly?
No, there's not. Everyone's been very quiet today. No one wants to unmute themselves. Does anyone have any more questions? We'll be finishing in a couple of minutes. So if you do have any, please let us know now.
Your last chance, potentially.
I think that's it then. Brilliant. Right, well, thank you very much for joining us today, Susannah. It was a really interesting talk, and thank you everyone that's joined us to come and say hello today. I hope you enjoyed it all. We'll be, as I said, we recorded this session, so we'll send a link around to the recording so you can watch it all after. And yeah, let us know if there's anything else you'd like to know. You can get in touch with Susannah. So thank you all. You can unmute yourself if you want to say bye. It's really weird. I can see loads of people posting in chat.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.